Right, everyone. It's Monday. It's 8 p.m. here in the UK. Yeah, 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in the US of A. And you're all very welcome to our Monday live show. We've got a fantastic guest we're going to be bringing on in a moment. And actually, it couldn't be more timely given events that happened across in the US at the weekend. I'm sure you know what I'm going to talk about. Everyone's been talking about it. It's amazing. We've had a couple of weeks, we've had like a political revolution of sorts here in the UK, and we've had, well, something very different happening in the United States. So we're going to get to all of that. Just before we get to all of that, I just want to, first of all, remind everyone our live show in London, London town, happens on the 26th of July. So a little under 11 days to go. So it's going to be an evening with Lawrence Fox, my friend Lawrence Fox, and many other friends as well. I'm sure you recognize some of these guys. I know many of you have followed these people and whatnot. But anyway, thanks to those who have bought tickets. If you haven't bought tickets, do buy a ticket. Make sure you're there. I'll see you in London. Bring a stab vest. You know what London's like. But hopefully you won't need it. So look, that's the first thing to say. And then the next thing is we're going to run the ad by our sponsors, Quantum Hypno. And then after that, we're going to get to the conversation with our very special guest. Play ad.
I am here to bring light. It's about healing. Mind, body, soul. Don't ever settle. Find your purpose. Find the answers. Don't hold back. Achieve maximum success. Book with me if you want to live.
Okay, there you go. Quantum Hypno. Do check it out. And thanks for the sponsorship, of course. Right. We're getting to the main topic, the topic du jour. And we are broadcasting this one, by the way. I just noticed, not only on Twitter, X, Rumble, YouTube, Facebook, Getter, or run across the we're actually back on YouTube for this one because I'm figuring I can't see how they give me a strike for what we're going to talk about, but hey, you never know because it's YouTube. But anyway, without further ado, I want to introduce you to our guest this evening, who I think you're going to find really interesting. And without further ado, welcome Auron MacIntyre to the stream.
Thank you so much, Harvey.
Yeah, listen, thank you very much for coming along. And it's when we were talking about doing this last week, well, something happened at the weekend, as they say, and it would be incredibly remiss if we didn't talk about it because I think it speaks to actually, some of the stuff you've written about as well. But I've got to say, Auron, I was sitting idly scrolling on social media on Saturday night, and all of a sudden I saw the news begin to come in. And thank goodness for, by the way, X, because at least we get the news relatively unfiltered about what had happened regarding President Trump. So I was really shocked, but the way it's all played out, I'm kind of really pleased about. So what was your response when you heard what had happened?
Yeah, it really can't be overstated how important X or Twitter is to the conversation at this point, because so many people saw the initial headlines from outlets like CNN or these different places, which are just cartoonish stuff like president stumbles and falls down, president bleeding, but we're not sure what's going on. These guys will say that anything that sneezes is immediately a racist conspiracy theory. But the minute Trump is obviously shot, obviously bleeding from the head, They can't even be bothered to say, and now I understand in a moment of national crisis, you need to have some level of, dialing things back. So just allegedly shots fired at this, Trump appears injured, these kind of things
Yeah.
would have been reasonable. But no, they just completely ignored what had happened. And if it hadn't been for the social media immediately feeding us the real events of what was going on, we would not know. Now, I would like to say that this was shocking. And of course it was to some degree, just to see it actually happening. But I had predicted this months ago. And I was not alone. Guys like Tucker Carlson had also said the media is planning the assassination of Donald Trump. And that is not hyperbole. They were encouraging it. They were laying the groundwork for it. And so it inevitably happened. Again, just shocking in the moment, seeing it all unfold. But I can't say there's any surprise involved. This is exactly the scenario they were setting up. Many people, myself included, predicted that it would happen. And here we are.
Yeah, well, you're right. You're absolutely right, Auron. I mean, the fact is, you don't spend years calling Donald Trump a fascist, a tyrant, the guy who's going to take away freedoms from Americans. You don't get away with that, and then there not be consequences. But I want to talk to you about the shooter and some of the questions regarding that as well. But as you say, I think the fact that we have, this is one of the headlines: Trump hurt but safe after a shooting. I'm surprised it didn't say after a minor fall, or as you said, he sneezed badly, sore ear. It was unbelievable, and I'm so thankful that we have actually X under Elon Musk, because I think there was, like, in the immediacy of the actual thing happening, the information, as always is the case. This was another one. Did you see this
Loud
one?
noises.
Yeah.
He was startled. He got spooked. There's like a car backfired behind him, and he just kind of jumped. He
fell over. Yeah, he fell over, and he heard it. Yeah. I mean, it's laughable, as you say, cartoonish. But that's been the mainstream media anyway. So once it became apparent exactly what had happened, that this was an attempted assassination on President Trump, and that it had narrowly failed by the sort of finest of margins. I think, if I understand it right, he moved his head just a little bit just as the shot went off. So that's where you can see the photograph of the bullet going past. There but for the grace of God.
Oh, yeah. He literally turned his head an inch to look at a graph of immigration statistics. Now, I try not to read too much into things, but there's some divine providence in the fact that Trump is looking at immigration statistics, pivots his head ever so slightly, and avoids a catastrophe. And you're right, this could have been horrific. I mean, obviously, the death of Donald Trump itself would be a tragedy. That would be, but I am terrified to think would have happened to my nation in that moment. To be very clear, they intended to splatter this man's head open in 4K.
They did,
right? And I don't. God help us where we could have gone. So yeah, I'm with you. Prayers, and protection for Donald Trump, because if that had not been the case, it would have been very bad very quickly.
And of course, we mustn't forget the fact that although thankfully the bullet missed Donald Trump, there was unfortunately and tragically there was, I think, a retired firefighter who was killed. So this was a very dangerous moment in American history. It actually it could have played out like a Dallas 1963. It could have been like that. And some people might say, well, there might be some other similarities between Dallas and 63 and what almost happened on Saturday night. What did you think of the Secret Service performance?
Yeah, not great. So first to just say, is Corey Capriture, I believe was his, I'm probably saying his last name incorrectly, but I just want to stop for a moment, because this man, according to the Facebook post that his daughter put out, this man was a loving father, a devoted Christian, someone who's well liked by everybody. His final posts are on X right now, saying how excited he was to go to this rally. And in this moment of incredible danger, his first instinct was to shove his wife and daughter to the ground and just cover them with his body. And that's the reason he was hit with the bullet that otherwise probably would have hit them. I mean, this guy is an absolute hero. It's a tragedy, but the valor of this man should be sung. There should be a statue of this guy somewhere. And the fact that the Secret Service was not able to protect from this is horrific. Not just because, like you said, what happened to Trump, but also to this innocent man. And the fact that the media drove people to this position. This man's blood is on their hands. Like this is a horrible crime. And the Secret Service protection is very suspect. Look, I want to avoid a lot of speculation when it comes to conspiracy theories. A lot of people on the left, when they saw what happened, was like, oh, Donald Trump staged this. You know, it was obviously something, a conspiracy, because he wanted sympathy, that kind of thing. But yeah, as the picture you showed right there is very clear, we can say that the Secret Service protection detail for Donald Trump was, how we say, very diverse. A lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion
It was,
involved
yeah.
In this. And on top of that, just the preparation for this whole thing is highly suspect. I'm sure you want to talk more about that, but the fact that the roof in question that the shooter was on left open, the fact that multiple people warned authorities about this man literally crawling around on the roof for minutes before, and Trump was still speaking on stage. No one had pulled him off stage. No one had taken any action. A police officer actually got up a ladder and confronted the man, had a gun pointed in his face. He had to back down because he couldn't access his firearm because he was still on the ladder. And yet Trump was still allowed to continue to speak through all of this.
Yeah.
Again, trying to avoid conspiracies, but if this isn't malice, it's malice via incompetence, extreme incompetence, the kind of incompetence that is, cartoonish.
Oh, no, yeah, I think that's a very fair point. I did see some people on the political left in the immediate aftermath tweeting out stuff like, oh, has this been a setup to boost Trump in the opinion polls? Now, a lot of those people, there was a lot of deletions of social media posts the next day because it became apparent that that was real sort of fruitcake stuff with it, that they were pushing out. But it does demonstrate, that I guess for some people it would only have been, had the bullet gone into Trump's head and blown it off, only at that point might they have believed that this was exactly what we all saw, or this was an attempt at assassination. But by this was a Forbes disgracing themselves yet again. Well, look at
what an amazing headline.
Yeah, it really is. But one of the things that cheered me up in the immediate aftermath of this, and I think it was within the first hour, was when Elon Musk said, I'm throwing my lot in with Donald Trump. That was a great moment, I thought, for, if you like, our side.
Yeah, and a lot of guys, there's a lot of people who were hesitant, who were on the fence. There were a lot of never Trump guys, or guys who had been Ron DeSantis supporters and just couldn't bring themselves to line up behind Trump after kind of how heated that primary had gotten. But at the minute after, some of the most dedicated guys I know, for guys like Ron DeSantis, immediately said, "All right, I'm behind Trump. The Trump yard sign goes in the yard on Monday." It's one of those things where, look, Donald Trump, and I'm not somebody who worships this guy. I think he has lots of personal faults. I think he's made bad decisions. I understand the criticisms of Trump. However, when you see a moment like that, where a man takes gunfire, and we all saw not just the picture, not the triumphant fist up picture, but that picture where he's down and he's got his face between his hands as the blood is running down his face. And you think in that moment, what's that internal monologue like, right? I could run, I could hide, right? You got a guy like Joe Biden who literally poops his pants on stage just because he's old. And a guy like Trump in that moment getting shot. I mean, that's a very real thing that could happen, right? Like an average human being scurries off, hides. Trump does not know in that moment if there's another shot coming. He doesn't know that the shooter's been shot. He doesn't know that he's safe. And he still pops up, pumps his fist, reassures the people on stage. I mean, that is a world historical moment. That's all there is to say to that. Yeah.
It is, that image is gonna, I mean, I'm sure the photographer who captured it should get a Pulitzer, because that's completely iconic. And did you see, by the way, Auron, that I think it was at the New York Times, they managed to crop the flag out of the image because they know it's iconic. They know this is something that's going to be there forever. People are going to talk about it. And I put it to you, did Donald Trump win the election on Saturday night?
Yeah, the election is over. Even the Democratic strategists are saying this, that this whole thing is done. Look, again, that juxtaposition between Joe Biden, who can barely read a sentence with a teleprompter without
Yeah,
fainting, and
yeah.
Donald Trump, who could literally take a bullet and then stand up and start speaking again. These are just there's nothing. Yeah, that other, because the Time magazine cover right before this one was Joe Biden walking off stage being confused, right?
So,
And then you
yeah,
have
yeah.
this one with Trump. There's just simply no way that this can work. Again, like we said, so many of the people who were on the outside, not sure. Maybe we won't get the voter turnout. Maybe I skipped this election. No, they are all behind Trump at
Yeah.
this point. And I think the left knows that at this moment, and that's why we're not hearing a lot about replacing Joe Biden on the ticket anymore, because at this point it's just like, well, sacrifice him to this election, because anybody else you run in this spot is just going to get mowed down by Trump at this point.
Yeah, that's exactly how I see it as well, actually. I think this is obviously up until this attempted assassination of Donald Trump. There was lots of speculation about whether Biden would last another week, month, whatever. But now I think it's settled. I think, as you said, they're going to stick with him. I don't know how, because he's so bad. But this is the shooter we're being brought up. Yeah, this is the 20-year-old guy who no social media history apparently. He was able to get set up the whole operation himself. That was a bit weird, wasn't it?
Yeah, have you seen that he was in a BlackRock video?
No, I didn't see
So,
that.
oh
But
yeah, so yeah.
that doesn't surprise me. Yeah.
No, just in case we don't have our Alex Jones tinfoil hats, properly affixed. So it turns out that he was, he's only 20 years old, so he was in high school not that long ago.
Yeah.
And BlackRock did some, of these sleazy promotional videos about how they care deeply about education or something. And so they had like B-roll of kids in classrooms, and he was actually in one of these. Like, he happened to be the kid that was in there when, the student when they were being shot. BlackRock has pulled that down. Draw your own conclusions, I guess, from that. But yeah, it's quite wild.
It is what I'll tell you as well. I see I'm being told here that because I think Donald Trump is picking his VP, his vice president, and I'm being told JD Vance. Now there's a name. JD Vance is going to be is being selected. Is that correct? Have you heard that? That's
I right before we started, I saw people saying that was likely the case from some sources I would trust. This is what I have been suggesting. Especially, look, you could have had a Marco Rubio. You could have had like a Tim Scott. These are guys that shore up different constituencies in certain areas. You understand where they come from. I've been saying from the beginning, he should have somebody who terrifies the left, is insurance against the left. And now after this assassination attempt, obviously, like, you want to take JD Vance and stable him to, like, I don't know, Franco or somebody, right? Like, you want someone terrifying the left. Some people were talking about, Eric Prince, but I didn't think that was likely. JD Vance is young. He's somebody who has the right rhetoric. He is capable. A lot of people on the left speculate that he is far more dedicated to a much more conservative vision than even Trump represents. And so I think he's a solid pick. I think of the people who are on the short list, that's where I would go. And it seems like they're making that pivot as well.
Yeah. Well, as I said, for obvious reasons, I'd be delighted to see a Vice President Vance in the White House. And the other thing about him is I think he's got Ulster Scots roots. He did write a book about it, didn't he? Yep. The hillbillies and all that there. So he's an interesting guy. But I agree with you, by the way, absolutely, because everything in American politics is just flipped. It's all changed in the past 48 hours. As you said, Trump doesn't have to pander to anything now because the base is energized. And I think November is, I'm still nervous about it, Auron, because I do think the Democrats have a very finesse cheating machine, which we saw back in 2020. But I think at this point, I can't see how that's going to save the day. Do you?
No, again, I had the exact same concern up until, Friday. I would have said, Trump, he's got to win by a mile, because if he doesn't, these guys have a very sophisticated machine politics. Molly Hemingway wrote a great book called Rigged for people who are interested more, and she doesn't go into ballots magically appearing at 3 a.m. She just goes through the open air mechanical things that the left has done to voting to radically shift it in their favor. Things that are all above board, all provable, all things that are technically legal, but have radically changed the way that the vote works in the United States. So I would have expected that to be much closer. But at this point, I really, anything's possible. Don't predicting things right now is the most dangerous thing you could do.
Yeah, I know. I know.
But I cannot imagine a world in which they would go ahead and try to fudge it that much against Trump at this point.
Well, I've got to say, I'm greatly relieved because I remember speaking we had Carrie Lake on the show here a while back and chatting to her about, what might happen. And the one bit where I felt that I wasn't totally sold on what she said. She said, yeah, don't worry about it. We know that they cheated, but next time round, we're going to sort that. Maybe. But in the light of what we've just seen, as you say, it'll be very, very interesting to see what happens. I mean, but obviously then there's the Republican conference, the national conference is happening right. No, I mean, that's the other thing. What did Trump do the day after being shot? He goes and plays golf.
Yeah.
What a hero. What a man.
Absolute animal. Yeah. No, that's exactly what you want to do in a situation like that, right? You need to show that it's business as usual. You need to show you're not scared. But it still goes to the credit of him. And like you said, it's got to go directly into the convention here. He's obviously going to give a barn burner of a speech. I mean, there's no way, the question will be what Trump makes the focus, right? We've heard that the focus is unity. That's good. That's it's important in this moment not to ratchet up tensions higher, right? That's a responsible thing to do. At the same time, I hope that internally, even though that's exactly what you want to say out front, I hope internally Trump is making a list and checking it twice. I hope he recognizes in this moment that they are not done with him, that the people who wanted this to happen to him are still in power and that they still operate the institutions. And even though we as a nation need to come together, the people responsible for creating the climate of fear and tyranny in the Washington, D.C. need to be completely removed from power. And I hope that is what he takes away from this moment.
Yeah, so do I. So do I, because you see, perhaps from an American perspective, I mean, understandably, you see it in US terms. But for those of us, say in the UK, a lot of us look to Donald Trump as well and to, trying to change. I mean, number one, to exercise, because I think there needs to be an exorcism of the White House, having the Bidens in there for almost 4 years. We need to, the hope that I look for lies in the States, because what sure as hell doesn't lie in the UK in the immediate aftermath of the other week and our election. So the best thing could happen is for Donald Trump to get back in. And I agree with you, by the way. I'm not blind to his faults as well, and he does have them. But I gotta say, when I saw him playing golf, and then he said he was going to Milwaukee, he was rewriting a speech, and you think that's a leader. Yeah. That's an absolute national leader, which is what America needs.
I forget who it was, but it was a guy who had been very adamantly pro DeSantis and had, he said, basically, I spent the entire campaign cycle campaigning against this man. I have warned about the dangers of this guy, over and over again. And today I would be willing to run through a wall for this guy. That is how galvanizing this moment was. Anybody who wasn't awake before this is awake now. Many of us on perhaps the new right, I guess you could call it, have been asking, do you know what time it is? Do you know what time it is? And now everybody knows what time it is. They all know what we were saying. This is where we are. This is the moment. And if you're not prepared, if you're not factoring these things in, then you just don't understand. There were a lot of questions as to whether Trump should run, what he stood for, whether he would be able to follow through the job. I understood all of those concerns, but ultimately it was a moment like this that was going to drive us, kind of to where we're going. And it's a tragedy, obviously, at this moment, but it's also a moment that galvanizes people understanding what's at stake.
But then, I mean, the thing about it is then that, so having said all of that, as you rightly observed, we've still got these people in power. We've still got the swamp pretty much everywhere as far as I can see, which brings me to actually your book, because I wanted to share this with all our viewers and listeners. The Total State: How Liberal Democracies Become Tyrannies. which is Auron's book here, folks, and you can pick it up, a copy of it. I would recommend you do that. And I think, you know, what you're saying there completely resonates with me, because that's what's happening. What is your view of liberal democracies? Can they endure, or are they an oxymoron?
I think that there are a lot of mechanical difficulties built into liberal democracies. And by the way, so did the founding fathers of the United States. The founding fathers originally only dedicated one half of 1/3 of one branch of government to to being democratically elected. Everything
Yeah.
else was chosen through different, the electoral college. Senators were not directly elected. They wanted there to be a voice for the people, but they understood that mixed regimes, which is what they were referencing, all the way back to Aristotle, we understood that there's a value in mixed regimes, right? Having this aristocratic option, but also having this voice of the people, that these were important. But when we shifted ourselves into the current understanding of liberal democracy, where the idea was to spread the franchise to everyone, that that popular sovereignty was the ultimate good, that this was the universal solution to all governance, right? We had guys like Francis Fukuyama write books about the end of history. We're done with this. We figured out that capitalism married with liberal democracy is just the perfect system. No one can argue this anymore. When we locked ourselves into this idea, we doomed ourselves to a particular fate, because actually ruling classes are never going to give people power. That's not how it works. Ultimately, it is always the organized minority that leads the disorganized majority. And so when our ruling class fooled people into thinking that it was governance by the people, instead of identifying that there was a particular class of people who had established a sustained power over the United States, that meant that those people were no longer held accountable. And we moved so much of our governance into these unelected bureaucracies that make up what many people call the deep state, and into these other agencies like the media and academia, which I think create the total state. We end up with a scenario where, even though we are a democracy in name, we are actually an oligarchy in practice. We have basically a secular theocratic oligarchy that dictates the way that we should be living our lives, and they ignore pretty much what the people think about any given situation.
Yeah, and I think, rather like myself, in your own case, that became crystallized in 2020, because up until this point, I would have, attacked the media for what it was, and the other branches for what of the deep state. But it was only in 2020, really, when the whole COVID tyranny came in, that I then realized, oh my God, this is really bad. This is, and not only, actually, it wasn't, it was essentially across the liberal democracies of the West, they were the worst. They were the most tyrannical of all.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? When I grew up as this talk radio, constitutional conservative Republican, I completely, believe that the Bill of Rights and the Constitution and separation of powers and all those beautiful things that we talk about when it comes to the founding fathers, they would protect us, right? This is what everyone I knew believed. The libertarians, that they were all on our side. We all believe that the government would never be able to do these kind of things because we had those protections. And then COVID came, and the churches were closed, but strip clubs were open. You couldn't go bury a loved one, you couldn't go to their funeral, but we were having riots in the streets, and people were drinking champagne when Joe Biden is selected during this whole thing. And that just threw my entire belief system into chaos. And so I had to go on this intellectual journey, and that's what's in the book, is really me, looking at these classic political thinkers, drawing some of the guys from outside the mainstream, and trying to understand what they said about power and the possibilities of how liberal democracy could go off the rails and how it could become what we have now. And that's what I try to do in the book, is explain that process for people who are like you and me and just completely were blown away by what happened in 2020.
Yeah, because I think it was the problems were always there, or it's just they became so manifest in such a way that, well, I think we were all shocked. And I looked around the world, and I looked at, places like Australia, New Zealand, France, all these countries, and I couldn't believe the tyranny. And in fact, actually, one of the least interestingly, from my perspective anyway, one of the least tyrannical countries was actually the United States, because at least there was a degree of not being totally subjugated by the kind of political media complex which dominated everything else. And you know, I mean, what was it like for you during 2020, 21?
Well, the good thing for me is I live in the free state of Florida under the protection of the great
And
King DeSantis,
yeah,
and you know,
yeah,
so my experiences were very different. Now, don't get me wrong, we locked down early, you know, for a few months. I was actually teaching public school at the time, so there
yeah.
was there was the schools were shut down and everybody went home, and we taught
Mm,
people on Zoom and all of this stuff. But slowly but surely, Florida realized, okay, we don't want to live like this.
no.
Maybe there's a real threat. Obviously, this is a real disease, especially older people who are vulnerable or people who had immune systems that were failed. They were disproportionately taking a lot of damage to this disease. So for those people, it made perfect sense for them to be very safe. However, for the rest of society, that was just not the case. And so we opened things up, we rolled things back. And so I lived a very different life. You know, there were people I knew
Mm,
who literally years after I was walking outside of my house, you know, we had schools open, all these things, were still locked in their home getting their third or fourth or whatever vaccination. It was just insane.
yeah, yeah. But how do you explain that? How do you explain the fact, and we see it here as well, there are some people still, in fact, actually today, I saw the Australian swimming team arrived in Paris
I saw
with
the picture.
did you see it, with
Yeah.
masks in the summer of 2024? How what is the mental conditioning? How does it happen that people remain like that? Or
It's that is a loyalty armband, right? That is like wearing the armband of a political party. To be
mm,
clear, that is a
mm,
uniform that they are
mm,
performatively showing
okay,
off their allegiance, how virtuous they are.
yeah,
Politics is not most people think that politics is about rational discourse, right? You and me get together and we have a public integrative debate on the way that we should do things. You know, that's how we understand the marketplace of ideas and in a
yeah,
liberal democracy. But in truth, politics is largely an exercise of identity and loyalty. And so that
mm,
means that
mm,
people who see themselves first as loyal Democratic Party members, as progressive coalition members, their first job is not to follow the science. Their job is to follow the science that their official party members put out. And
mm.
so that's what they're doing in that scenario. It persists this long because the purpose of it was never to defend you against any given disease, though maybe they did actually believe that for a while. It was always, however, to signal your loyalty to the regime.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, that's right. And what I think that one of the things that they learned in those 2022 years is quite a significant percentage of the population will do that. They will go along with essentially what they're told, which worries me profoundly, because then where is our defense if basically people do what they're told?
Yeah, this is something I talk about at length in the book. What we forget is that the Constitution itself was never meant to stop the expansion of government. Written constitutions are only as good as the people who enforce them. And by the way, the
Mm,
founding fathers said the same thing. John Adams, our second president, famously said that the Constitution was for moral and religious people, and it was wholly inadequate to govern any other. And that's
mm,
because they understood that a
mm,
constitution is simply the collection of folkways, beliefs, traditions, and history of a people. And if that isn't animated by real people who believe in those things, then the paper protections themselves, the words themselves, are easily manipulated by
mm,
bad actors. And so, what I think is the real problem that people didn't recognize is that so much of our organic identities, our members as families, communities, churches, people who have children who are kind of wrapped in this network of protective institutions, has all been ripped away. And when that happens, then people are just left open to the total state. They just believe whatever their television, the propaganda, the academia, the
yeah.
authorities tell them to believe. You'll notice that most of the people who push back tended to be religious in these situations. And
Very much so. In fact, actually, I was across in London a couple of weeks back, and I met up with my friend, Pastor Rodney Howard Brown, who has a big church in Florida. And he and I got to know each other back in 2020, when obviously, even then, churches were told to close. And he refused to close his church which I thought was pretty heroic of him. And so we met up in London a couple of weeks ago, and like what you're saying is true. The churches, well, some churches, but not all. A lot of churches
Not
told
all.
the deadline.
No, it's true. Plenty did buckle under, and that's something that a lot of spiritual leaders are now being held accountable for, and should be held accountable for, saying that the government has priority over our beliefs. But despite the failure of some people, it was that commitment to faith that was more likely a predictor of pushing back, right? Saying, sorry, but we go to church on Sunday. That's what we do. That's the tradition. That's the belief. And that is a protection against tyranny. Most people don't recognize that none of us are ever alone. We've unfortunately, many people on the right have pushed this idea of like radical individualization, this libertarian idea that everyone is their own actor and they should never have connections to anybody. But what they don't recognize is actually it's those prior commitments, those pre-political commitments to our families, our churches, or organic societal commitments that protect us against the total state. Totalitarianism spreads by destroying those things. That's why in Soviet Union or Nazi Germany, it's the kids who go ahead and inform on the parents. That is, that's the worst thing, right? That's when the state has total control, when you can break that bond between parent and child, and they think it's something good to inform on or turn in. And sadly, we're starting to see that in the United States, where people proudly say, I turned my parents in to the January 6th commission, to the FBI, because I knew they were out there. That's how you're approaching a total state.
And then, of course, undermining, as you say, the family in every possible way is also through, for example, the whole, the advance of the LGBTQ plus blah, blah, blah narrative. I mean, that's also highly destructive of those bonds, which are so important. And yet that certainly, I see that as something that continues to advance. That needs to be pushed back on, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. That ideology is meant specifically for this purpose, right? The state needs an excuse to be able to mediate all of these social spheres that previously did not belong to them. And they've been doing this for a long time with the family. They've been reducing the incentives to start families, right? They've been making it more and more difficult for the average person to have children. They've forced people to go into public education, these kind of things, breaking down the authority of the parent. But the final level of this, as you're saying, kind of the transgender gender ideology, because once the child is somebody who needs to be protected from the parent who might say no to that transition, now you have a situation where the state is totally in charge of the child.
Yeah, that's right. And we see it in the UK as well, in the school environment, where they try to be able to have conversations between the child or the pupil and the teachers, and keep that away from the parents, so the parents don't actually know what is happening to their child when it's in that schooling environment. And that's the absolute opposite of what it should be, isn't it? I mean, we want our kids to be safe. We don't want them having all kinds of curious isn't the right word, really, freakish ideologies thrown into their minds. And yet that's what's happening. It's happening with you. It's happening with us still. So I see that as a real challenge for us. And I don't know how do we fight back against that, Auron?
Well, in the book, I talk about how this isn't just a mistake. This ideology is necessary for the advance of the total state. One of the things that our progressive managerial elite need to do, as we said, is break down all those pre-political commitments, all those bonds. But they also need to break down all the particularities of cultures and civilizations so that they can be brought under this mechanism of managerial control.
Yeah.
The thing that we really need to do is scale society back down. And that's a very difficult thing, because that requires a massive shift in thinking. But in the United States, we were founded on a principle of federalism. The founding fathers recognized that actually decisions, if they're going to be effective, and leaders, if they're going to be loyal to the people, need to be close to the people that they're in charge of. They need to be parts of the community. They need to be invested. They need to have skin in the game. When you pile all of your elites in DC, or worse, Brussels, there's no way that those people are going to be invested in what those laws do to the people they're actually governing. And so we have built our entire society on massification, trying to centralize power into these massive bureaucracies wherever possible. And we have to break those back down and get ourselves back to a situation where we live in organic communities that can actually have leaders that are accountable to specific peoples and not to grand ideological projects that span the globe.
Yeah, and as you say, Brussels is a great example of the very worst of that, because the whole. I see someone says, "Does David know his son has been named VP?" I don't think my son has been named VP, but if he does, I wouldn't object. Yeah, you are right about that. I mean, I see the disconnect between the elites in Brussels and what happens across the European continent. One of the reasons that us Brits voted to leave in 2016, the same year that Donald Trump got elected, we basically we tried to assert ourselves. Now, it was denied us. We never got what we voted for, because I think the powerful elites, they know they can't, they don't want to allow us to go where you want us to go. Or, I mean, that's the punchline in this, surely.
Yeah, of course. And my buddy Nima Parvini actually, I believe, coined the no seats, the zero seats meme that ended up spreading in this election. I understand, Hitchens and some other UK commentators were against this movement, but really, this is just what Donald Trump was for us, right? We knew that the Republican Party was useless.
Yeah.
And that's why we'd gotten Mitt Romney's and, these jokes of candidates previously. They never really wanted to fight back. And so Donald Trump was our zero seats, because basically the Republican Party technically exists still at this point, but really what we have is Donald Trump and the people who have to do what he says, right? Because he's broken us out of that frame. He's talking about immigration. He's talking about economic protectionism. He's talking about ending foreign wars. He's talking about things that nobody in the neocon establishment of the Conservative Party was willing to do ever. And you guys are in a scenario where it very strangely, it's like the Tories were leading the left from the right. They were saying, well, we were against this stuff, but they were never going to do any of it. And you knew they were never going to do any of it. And so the only thing that could possibly stop this was just a complete punch in the teeth, the same way that Donald Trump was a punch in the teeth to the Republican establishment. So I hope you guys rebuild quickly, because I know that's a tough situation to be in, but probably politically necessary.
Yeah, no, I was very happy to see. I wanted to see net zero Conservative seats. I wanted to see the Conservative Party reduced to embers, if possible, because by doing that, it's a blow to the Uni Party, which we've got the Uni Party. You sort of have the Uni Party as well, and so yeah, we've got a way to go. We don't really have a Donald Trump. The best we have is a Nigel Farage, I suppose, if you're being honest about it. And good to see that Nigel Farage is actually flying to the States. I think it's today, to meet up with Trump and to offer his support. So I mean, it is good. I love the bonds that between the UK and the US, the right kind of bonds between us. And I think certainly we've got a left-wing administration in the UK. That's another reason why it'll be a delight if Donald Trump can get back in November, because that's going to cause all kinds of friction. But foreign wars, adventurism, and all that kind of stuff, I mean, Trump's instincts are pretty good there, unlike the whole, well, Biden doesn't make any decisions, does it? It's the Obama light regime in the background running it, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. It's very clear that before all of this, even before the debate, that Joe Biden was completely checked out. The media was writing stories back in 2019 about how Joe Biden was senile, and literally there's headlines from leftist journalists saying, like, Joe Biden, just live long enough so we can push you over the finish line and then replace you the minute you get into office. That was the mood in 2020. So that is already, the situation. It's only become more apparent that Joe Biden was never in charge of that regime. However, he did have this amount of formal power, just because, we still have to pretend like the laws are the laws, and the delegates were still assigned to him, and the campaign money was still assigned to him. And so they kind of had to pretend that was the case. Now, like we both said, they're probably just going to sacrifice him to this, but it is good to know. And I hope Trump takes that further. When he tried to do his withdrawals, he literally had generals just ignore him. When he tried to reduce troop counts in different foreign deployments, they boasted later on about how they ignored what he said. And that's why what I was saying is, Trump has to go in there understanding that he needs to rebuild the government brick by brick if he wins this election. That absolutely has to be the case. He can't leave any of these institutions as he found them, because they are all organized against him, and they will never implement the agenda of reducing foreign wars or reducing immigration unless he literally dismantles these things and goes ahead and rebuilds them with his own people at the helm.
But he must realize that. I look back in 2016, and I think he was perhaps more naive than well, he probably did. There's a lot of stuff he wouldn't have known, but by 2024, he knows all. I mean, we all say it, we all know it. So I would hope he absolutely, goes and cuts the stuff out at the very root. I mean, look at the U.S. military, which was once such a fearsome, renowned machine, and look at the joke. That, I mean, even actually the other night at the Secret Service, when we had someone said, what was it, Melissa McCarthy? Was she one of the squad, those trying to? Did you say that she couldn't even holster her weapon? Did you say that? So so the whole sort of leftist cancer needs cut out for if things are going to change in the States, for sure.
Yeah, it's very clear that the leftist ideology that has infected every institution in the United States is incredibly, incredibly deadly. It gets people killed. It's already gotten people killed. It already got that poor fireman killed, and it will continue to get people killed. We see planes having difficulty landing. We see the maintenance of basic services falling apart. We see the medical schools ignoring competence to go ahead and bring people of certain races to the forefront. This is not a joke anymore. It's not putting some putting the lesbian of color into your HR system and making sure that all the coloring pages are the right are the right political correctness. We're talking about people's lives. We're talking about the kinds of cold hard things you need to run a civilization, and they've been completely corrupted. I don't know if you saw this, but recently the DoD had a training session at one of our military installations where they labeled pro-life supporters as the greatest domestic terror threat in the United States. This is not, and to be clear, this is not the FBI or the Department of Homeland Security. These are not people tasked with protecting America from domestic threats. This is the military, the people who are designed to kill with indiscriminate force those that are a danger to this country, foreign enemies, and they're being trained to treat the average Republican voter as a domestic terror threat, while a leftist is out there literally planning to murder the president. That's the situation we're in right now.
Yeah, and as you say, I mean, it's very serious. It's not actually comedic, because it's so dangerous that this has happened over years. I mean, this just didn't happen overnight. I mean, you could track it back. I'm not sure how far you would want to care to track it back to, but certainly, I don't know, since Reagan left, maybe, I don't know. It's been an ongoing thing, but the momentum seems to be gathering. And as you say, all the institutions, the decadence, the corruption, the utter stupidity of them. It's shocking. And I'll tell you what, those of us watching from outside the US and we see it all, it does take your breath away when you think, my God, this is the US we're seeing here. This is, they've got all the diversity hires, across the piece. You've got the most woke academia in the world. And yeah, it's going to be a big job. Cleaning out the Aegean stable is going to be quite a task for Donald Trump. I hope he chooses wisely who he surrounds himself with this time.
Yeah, that's going to be a huge issue. Like you said, America is in a strange position because we're simultaneously like ground zero for this ideology, but also have the most resistance to this ideology at the same moment. And so there's this very weird dichotomy where most of the ruling institutions are on this side and they have this ideology and they're working together. However, we also have some of the greatest opponents to it. And really the trick is the credentials. We had a scenario where all of the universities and all of the major institutions that would grant you the credentials necessary to operate this bureaucracy were on the left. So even when Donald Trump went in and he appointed people that were loyal to him, they couldn't get anything done because they didn't have the experience and the credentials, and they couldn't move the levers of power the way he wanted. So he got rid of those people and brought in more experienced people. But all of those people with the credentials and the experience were against him. They were all people who were traitorous. And so he moved in a lot more competent people, but they're all competent traitors. And so the right has really been caught in this pants down news. is almost like the dog that caught, the car. They finally had this presidency and they didn't know what to do with it because they didn't understand that all these organizations would be against them from the beginning. So
Mm.
one thing that they have been doing is thinking a lot more about staffing. There's the infamous Heritage Foundation 2025 project. The left have been running around, waving
Yeah.
around that. It's terrifying. But
Yeah.
ultimately, this project wasn't working with Trump. It was never aligned directly with Trump, but it was simply there to create a database of people who were outside of the system, at least to some extent, as outside of the system as Heritage Foundation can be, but more outside of the system, but still had the skills to fill those slots. And so hopefully this time, when Trump does take power, he recognizes the importance of personnel and putting the right people in these positions, hitting the ground running, knowing all of these things are going to be hostile, not assuming that orders given or orders followed, but making sure to follow up on all of those very vigorously. And like I said, the most important thing is really being willing to dismantle. Sorry, but the FBI's got to go. Department of Education has got to go. These things, it's not negotiable. Can't reform this stuff. Day one, if you don't have a plan to take these people down, you're a rube, and they're just gonna come for you again. He needs to have a plan, top to bottom, to remake this thing.
Yeah, actually, here in the UK, one of the things that we talk about is we've got like the civil service, which essentially runs the deep state. It's beyond reform. It has to be destroyed at some point, because if it isn't, then you can't affect any change. It's impossible to just like as you said in your situation in the States. If things don't, I mean, the FBI, I see the FBI as an existential threat to the US.
Oh, absolutely. And that's what I explain at length in the book. Like you said, this is not new. This has been an ongoing process. And a lot of this is systemic. Like this is built into the way that we organize our government. We have shifted our society towards a society that no longer has regional autonomy, no longer, but everything is centralized in these bureaucracies. And once you centralize everything in these bureaucracies, the ruling class tries to separate the interests of the people from the ruling class. They create organizations like the FBI, which basically become a Praetorian Guard, which is only really interested in their own power and continuing the people that they're loyal to. They have no duty to the wider nation. So I agree with you 100%. If they don't recognize that an organization like the FBI is a direct threat to the continuation of rule of law in the United States, then this administration is dead in the water before it even starts.
Yeah, it's quite scary when you say it like that, though, isn't it? I mean, it's been but I think the FBI has been dodgy since the early '60s. It's not just been recently, but the weaponization of so many institutions, certainly under Biden, lawfare, for example. I mean, it's honest to God, it's really bad what we see happening. The way the justice itself, they've tried to corrupt it anyway as best they can.
Yeah, no, the justice system is an absolute mess. I'm sorry, I didn't hear right before what you said there, though.
No, I'm simply saying that the whole sort of lawfare.
Oh yes, the lawfare. Okay,
The lawfare aspect of it. So yes, I just see this here. And just as good, lots of memes about it actually the past few days. Yeah, it has been a good day for a great couple of days, because I see the other court case against him was struck down, wasn't it?
Yeah, they dropped the documents case. They said that the special prosecutor's appointment was actually unconstitutional, which of course it is. And so that the case couldn't go forward. It's amazing. They've tried to bankrupt Donald Trump. They tried to make it illegal for him to run. They tried to remove him from the ballot. They tried to throw him in prison, and now they've tried to kill him. And they still can't stop this guy. And now all of the things all the mechanisms that they were trying to use are crumbling around them. Right after this, it's an amazing thing to behold.
It really is. It feels we're living through a momentous period in history, I think. And I think the US is, as I say, Auron, I see the US as the beacon if it functions properly, if these changes that we've been discussing can be implemented, because without, I mean, I honestly don't think the US could have survived another 4 years of Bidenism, whatever that is. Do you?
Yeah. No, not at all. And it's very strange. We more or less inherited the empire after World War II in a way. We inherited that kind of global leadership role. And so it's very strange, the relationship, because, many of the nodes in kind of Western liberal democracies come back to the United States in some way. And really, the hope is, and I speak with I have a number of friends in the UK. I'm over there, and the hope is really that once again we can return to a system where we can be friends. But every time we sneeze, you guys don't catch a cold. Where
Yep.
where you guys have the sovereignty you deserve, and the American government serves the American people again, rather than serving this global empire. And that really is what we're hoping, is a return to nationalism in the sense of nations actually being self-determining, self-governing, so that Biden's inane running of this country doesn't somehow affect you guys, where you can actually operate a real nation, rather than we're all being stuck into this web of nasty delusional elites who end up managing so much of this global empire.
And of course, also part of another big issue that you've got and we have, the whole immigration issue, the fact that your southern border doesn't really function, obviously deliberately so. And do you think that's something that Donald Trump will be able to deal with this time around?
Oh, he absolutely has to. Again, it was an insane tragedy that it didn't get done the first time. Some of it's Trump's fault, some of it's Republicans' fault, some of it is just a system that was very difficult to overcome. But it absolutely has to happen. The Democratic Party has gone out of their way very explicitly, when they're not calling you a conspiracy theorist for noticing the things that they say, to
Yeah.
to transform the United States, fundamentally transform the
Yeah.
United States demographically, but also politically, and to make sure that they import tens of millions of people who, through our 14th Amendment and birthright citizenship, instantly gain the ability to vote the minute that they have a child in the United States. Those children are American citizens and they can vote. And then also, people like Biden and his administration have been working towards amnesty programs. They've
Yeah.
already given executive amnesty out. So, a lot of people say, oh, there's illegal immigrants, but they can't vote. It's like, well, no, actually, they will be able to vote, if not through the inevitable amnesties, through the birthright citizenship of their children. And so what has happened is there is a generational program by the left to permanently change the democratic process in the United States, to make sure that the reality of voting in the United States is changed in perpetuity. And the same thing is happening to you guys in the UK. Obviously, you have a very, very similar scenario where kind of the legacy populations of those nations are being diluted on purpose. We had one town that got highlighted by JD Vance in one of his speeches recently, that there was a town of 60,000 people, and they dropped 20,000 Haitian immigrants into a city of 60,000 people within the span of like a year.
I saw that. Yep.
That kind of radical change destroys a society, no matter who it is, because that kind of change completely destabilizes social patterns. And obviously, the Democrats are banking on these people being permanent voters for them.
Yeah, but this is the thing about the radical left. They do implement these policies ruthlessly. They couldn't care less. What we need to see, I think, on our side is that we follow through on everything that is talked about, and we're in our own regards, we are radical, and that means, as you say, or in dismantling the FBI, all the stuff, sealing the border, all the stuff that needs to happen. Otherwise, because you only get moments like this every now and again. This, I think, is the pivotal year for the United States, as much as any year in its history has been. And if Donald Trump can get back in again, and if there's nothing else happens, and hopefully there won't be, then that'll be a glorious moment for us all, I suspect.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's absolutely important that he succeeds, he's victorious, and in that moment he understands the gravity of that victory, and he makes sure to make those very important changes which end the kind of systemic shift the left has been creating. Because, as you said, if they don't do this now, then the generations of voters that have been imported in the United States will completely change our future forever. This is the moment. This is the time. If you are not closing the border, if you are not deporting the large amount of legal immigrants who've been brought in recently, then you're simply resigning the country to a permanent leftward shift. That's just the reality of the situation. So I'm with you. This is a huge moment, and he has to take advantage of it.
He absolutely has. Can I just thank you, Auron, very much for being with us? Can I just bring it back up on screen, please, Auron's book? Because I do think that those of us, we have to equip ourselves with these core understandings. So it's important, Auron, that we do get how liberal democracy can be so easily and quickly transformed into tyrannies. So everyone, please, if you get a chance and you want to educate your mind, do check out Auron's book. I highly endorse it and recommend it to you. Auron, you can be found over on, I know you've got multiple platforms, but this is your X. I'm old fashioned. I call it Twitter still.
It's always Twitter. I'm never calling it X. They can't make
Yeah,
me.
I mean, Elon needs to change that. I know he's obsessed on the X thing. Yeah, but this is your Twitter. So folks, do make sure you follow Auron for all his really great insights and stuff. I hope you've enjoyed this evening. It's been a pleasure to introduce you to my audience here. Thanks for giving us your time, Auron. And we'll follow, as always, what happens across the pond with great interest and hoping for a great end of the year. But certainly, as I say, as the Chinese say, we live in interesting times. Auron MacIntyre, it's been a pleasure to speak with you. Thanks for your time. Thanks, everybody, for watching. And I'll be back later in the week. That's it from us. Good night.